Fellow Sazzaitas, is it possible for an Ibrahim Traore-like figure to emerge from the Zimbabwe Defense Forces? In other words, can junior military officers in Zimbabwe overpower their senior commanders and stage a coup against President Mnangagwa? Remember, Blessed Geze has recently been criticizing the senior leadership of the ZDF for inaction. He is disappointed that General Spanda has not been able to do what General Chiwenga did in 2017, and that is staging a coup. But of course, coups are not always led by top commanders. Sometimes junior officers can lead a successful rebellion and take power, just like what happens in Ibrahim Traore's country, Burkina Faso, where coups are almost always led by junior commanders. Traore himself was a captain, which is a junior rank. So, Traore, a junior commander, outsmarted his senior commanders and took power. Today, he is president. Can that happen in Zimbabwe? Will that happen in Zimbabwe? Should that happen in Zimbabwe? Well, fellow Sazzaitas, slay queens and bingers, socialites, papalites, vasinamalites, varkujga rice, never sinama rights. Welcome to the special report. Now, remember, we are trying to answer the question of, is it possible for an Ibrahim Traore-like figure to emerge from the Zimbabwean military? In other words, is there capacity for junior commanders to stage a coup? But the question is much more broader than that. Because remember, Ibrahim Traore does not belong to any political party. So, is it possible for any Zimbabwean military officer to lead a coup that does not benefit ZANU-PF? Well, let me start by defining what I mean by low-ranking officer. By low-ranking officer, I simply mean any commissioned officer below the rank of brigadier general, meaning officers who command smaller units like battalions, platoons, and specialized detachments. We are talking about mid-level to entry-level military commanders, from the rank of colonel down to the rank of second lieutenant. I will explain these ranks in detail to show you the difference in authority for each rank. But of course, we can't just rush to talking about ranks before understanding the structure and form of the Zimbabwean military as a whole. Because understanding this will give us a better appreciation of the complexity of staging a coup in Zimbabwe. So, what do we mean when we say the Zimbabwean military? Well, two things: the ZDF and JOK. Now let's begin with JOK. JOK is a combination of 5 branches of the Zimbabwean security services. What are these 5 branches? Well, you have the ZNA, Air Force, CIO, ZRP, and prison services. Commanders of these 5 branches are called service chiefs. Together, they make up the Joint Operations Command, commonly known as JOK. This is the highest military command structure in Zimbabwe. When these guys unanimously make a decision against you, zvaendwa, it's game over. They are the force behind ZANU-PF. That's what ED meant when he said, "We are the army, we are the police, we are the CIO. We determine who goes to prison and who gets out." He wasn't bluffing, you know. JOK is not a joke. Now, these 5 branches which make up JOK have a specific function regarding the maintenance of peace and security in Zimbabwe. The ZRP deals with law enforcement, that is, detecting, investigating, and ultimately preventing crime. The CIO gathers high-level intelligence to protect Zimbabwe from internal and external threats. Prison services protect the society from criminals through the incarceration and rehabilitation of convicted persons. That leaves us with one very important function which is not exercised by the police, prisons, or even the CIO. What is that function? It's a defense. The function of defense is exercised by two branches of the Zimbabwean military, namely the ZNA and the Air Force. Together, they make up the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, commonly known as ZDF. They have a role of defending our borders, thereby protecting Zimbabwe, its people, its national security, and territorial integrity. Now, already, it's very clear that for a coup to occur, you don't target the police, you don't target prison services, or even the CIO. You target the ZDF. A military coup will almost always be staged by a member or members of the ZDF. So, let's dig into the ZDF. As many of us will know, General Philip Valerio Sibanda is the highest ranking soldier in Zimbabwe. All soldiers in Zimbabwe, ranked or not, they salute General Sibanda. He holds the title of ZDF, meaning Commander Defense Forces, which is short for Commander of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces. The ZDF can only be commanded by a full general, not a lieutenant general, not a major general, not a brigadier general, a full general. That means General Sibanda is a full general. And as I said before, the ZDF has two branches, the ZNA and the Air Force, and both of them have separate commanders who report to General Sibanda. The current commander of the ZNA is Lieutenant General Emmanuel Matatu, and the commander of the Air Force of Zimbabwe is Air Marshal John Zede. The Zimbabwe National Army is larger than the Air Force of Zimbabwe in terms of personnel and organizational structure. That makes it the primary branch of the ZDF, with greater influence in domestic and regional operations. Now, let's look at the ranks. As I mentioned before, the highest rank in the ZDF is that of a full general who commands the ZDF with the title of a CDF, meaning a Commander Defense Forces. That means he is the boss of the ZNA and the Air Force combined. So, directly under the rank of a full general, you have the ranks of a Lieutenant General and Air Marshal. Commanders of the Zimbabwe National Army must at all times occupy the rank of a Lieutenant General, and commanders of the Air Force of Zimbabwe must at all times occupy the rank of Air Marshal. It is important to note that the ZNA commander and the Air Force commander are at the same level. None of them has authority over the other, but of course, the ZNA commander has greater practical authority in most scenarios, especially regarding domestic stability or coup risks, because the ZNA is larger and more politically influential. Section 216 of the Zimbabwean Constitution says that a person who has served as commander of either the ZNA or the Air Force may be appointed to become commander of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, but a person who has served as a commander of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces may not be appointed to command either the ZNA or the Air Force or any other security service. That means General Sibanda can no longer command the ZNA, the Air Force, police, prisons, or even the CIO. And by the way, a person who has commanded one security service cannot be appointed to command another security service. For example, a person who has commanded the ZNA cannot command the Air Force of Zimbabwe. And a person who has commanded the Air Force of Zimbabwe similarly cannot command the ZNA. A person who has been Commissioner General of the Police may not be appointed to lead the CIO, and a person who has been Director General of the CIO may not be appointed to lead the prison services, and so on and so forth. But for purposes of today's video, We will concentrate on the Zimbabwe National Army because it is the largest and more influential branch of the Zimbabwean military. As I said before, the Zimbabwe National Army can only be commanded by someone who holds the rank of Lieutenant General, meaning if you get promoted to the position of commander of the Zimbabwe National Army, you automatically become a Lieutenant General. Let me briefly run you through the structure of the Zimbabwe National Army. At the top, you have the Operational Commander, who is the ZNA boss, with the rank of Lieutenant General. But to run the affairs of the army, the ZNA commander is assisted by 3 people. These 3 people occupy the position of a Chief of Staff, and they have different roles. One Chief of Staff is responsible for the General Staff. That is the people who are involved in the planning and coordination of military operations. The second Chief of Staff is responsible for administration. He oversees recruitment, promotion, remuneration, and the general welfare of ZNA personnel. The third Chief of Staff is responsible for logistics, equipment, and supplies. Those are the 3 top military officers who assist the ZNA commander in running the army. The 3 of them occupy the rank of Major General, meaning the rank of Major General is the second highest in the ZNA. Below the rank of Major General, you have the rank of Brigadier General. This rank is typically occupied by people who command brigades. A brigade is a group of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers. Now obviously, 5,000 soldiers is a lot of people to manage in one group. So to make it manageable, brigades are subdivided into battalions, meaning a brigade is made up of battalions. A battalion is a group of 300 to 1,000 soldiers, typically commanded by lieutenant colonels or sometimes a full colonel. The rank of a colonel is higher than that of a lieutenant colonel, just like the rank of a general is higher than that of a lieutenant general. The word lieutenant originates from a French phrase which means placeholder or deputy or second in command in terms of rank. Now let's recap. The highest rank in the ZNA is that of a lieutenant general. The second highest rank is that of Major General. Then comes Brigadier General. Then comes a colonel or colonel. Then comes a lieutenant colonel or lieutenant colonel. Under the rank of lieutenant colonel, there is the rank of major. And it's papa, even though I'm going deeper. Go deeper, Taffy. Focus, Taffy, focus. All right, where were we? We were where we were. Okay, major. Yeah, major. A major is a mid-level staff officer who can act as a deputy battalion commander. Remember, battalions are typically commanded by colonels and lieutenant colonels. Majors generally command smaller units. They supervise and mentor junior officers and ensure effective coordination between enlisted personnel and higher command. Below the rank of major, you have the rank of captain, who commands a group of 100 to 200 soldiers. This is the rank that was held by Ibrahim Traore when he staged a coup in 2022. In fact, Burkina Faso coups are almost always led by officers below the rank of a brigadier. Burkina Faso has had 9 successful coups. Out of these 9, 3 were led by captains. That is Thomas Sankara in 1983, Blaise Compaoré in 1987, and Ibrahim Traore in 2022. Well, of course, Thomas Sankara's coup was led by Blaise Compaoré, but Sankara was the ideological and symbolic leader of that coup. Compaoré was the operational commander. But why are Burkina Faso coups almost always led by junior commanders? Well, in Burkina Faso, low-ranking officers lead coups, firstly because of a historical precedent. As I said before, Burkina Faso has a whole history of coups which are mostly led by junior commanders. You see, once a culture of coups develops in a country, it's very difficult to stop it. Burkina Faso is the capital of coups on the African continent. No other country in Africa has had more coups than Burkina Faso. So, it's a culture issue. It has become normal for the military to intervene in national politics. Soldiers are used to it, and civilians are also used to it. But over and above that, it's got something to do with the proximity of low-ranking commanders to the ordinary soldier. Captains command a small group of soldiers, typically nothing more than 200 soldiers. This obviously gives them a close relationship with their troops. So because of this, they often inspire more devotion from soldiers under them than the senior commanders. And given that they share the grievances and the suffering of the ordinary soldiers who they lead on a daily basis, it's very easy for them to stir up a rebellion, especially in circumstances where the senior military leaders are disconnected from the reality on the ground. As you might know, there is an Islamic insurgency in Burkina Faso. 40% of Burkina Faso is under the control of rebels. That means Burkina Faso is at war. This war started in 2015. At the time, there was an elected president. His name was Kabore. Well, his name is Kabore because he's still alive. Kabore was removed in a coup in January 2022 because the military was frustrated with his inability to end the Islamic insurgency. But Kabore's removal from power later exposed the disconnect between the senior leadership and junior officers in the Burkina Faso military. This disconnect contributed to the September 2022 coup. You see, junior officers were frustrated by how the insurgency was being handled by the military government, which had taken power in January 2022. Ibrahim Traore himself was leading a unit in Kaya, the fifth largest city in Burkina Faso. He shared the grievances of soldiers under him. He felt their suffering. There was inadequate resources, delayed payments, and insufficient support from the senior military leadership. Soldiers on the ground became desperate, and desperate times called for desperate measures. Another coup was inevitable. That disconnect between the senior military leadership and the ordinary soldier on the ground made it easy for Traore to organize a rebellion. Now the question is, can this be replicated in Zimbabwe? Well, it's not impossible given the social, political, and economic hardship in Zimbabwe. Soldiers are underpaid and they are struggling to make ends meet. And there is a disconnect as well, because while the ordinary soldier is struggling to make ends meet, the top commanders are well paid and well taken care of, which is why they defend the system. Almost all the senior commanders have made political statements in defense of ZANU-PF, maybe with the exception of General Swanda. They do so to protect their own interests. By the way, what do you think the 2017 coup was about? Why did the generals move against Mugabe? The answer is very simple. They were protecting their own interests. And ZANU-PF is the only political vehicle which they trust to protect their interests. So when Robert Mugabe allowed the G40 to take over ZANU-PF, he became a threat and he had to be removed along with the G40. That was the reason for the coup. It had nothing to do with the suffering of the ordinary soldier. It had nothing to do with the condition of service for ordinary soldiers. In fact, it is my submission that the current economic hardship is not enough to cause a revolt by ordinary soldiers. Yes, ordinary soldiers are struggling, but they are not suffering in isolation. They are not struggling in isolation. They are suffering along with ordinary civilians, and that has been the state of affairs in Zimbabwe for decades. Zimbabwean soldiers are used to their suffering, just like ordinary civilians are also used to their suffering. This is a conversation that Zimbabweans are not yet ready to have. We have been conditioned to accept our suffering. The easiest way to keep a man in bondage is to make that man believe that he was born to suffer. Once a person believes that he was born to suffer, he lacks the will to fight back. He gives up and gives in. That explains why citizens do nothing no matter what ZANU-PF does, no matter how cruel ZANU-PF becomes. We have become indifferent to suffering, and we have a high tolerance for nonsense. The same applies to soldiers. Even the 2008 crisis, where money was worthless and grocery stores were empty, was not enough to cause a revolt in the military. It would take more than economic hardship for something to give. Remember what led to the rise of Ibrahim Traore. His coup was driven by widespread dissatisfaction with the government's failure to address the Islamic insurgency, meaning there is an actual war in Burkina Faso, which has been raging since 2015. Soldiers in Burkina Faso are not just hungry, they are also dying because of bullets. So it's a double tragedy. In fact, it's a triple tragedy because their country is being overtaken by rebels. Zimbabwe, on the other hand, has no war. Yes, it faces economic and political challenges, but it lacks a comparable active insurgency to radicalize junior officers and galvanize them into action. The other issue is the ZANU-ZANLA relationship. Zimbabwe's military is deeply entwined with ZANU-PF. The ZDF acts as a kingmaker rather than a revolutionary force. It behaves like a military wing of ZANU-PF. This is because everyone in the command element is a war vet of some sort. They are all united by their wartime suffering. That's why they call it Chinuchedu. So that means, if an Ibrahim Traore-like figure is to emerge from the ZDF, it will probably have to be someone without liberation credentials. Someone who sees beyond ZANU-PF and thinks beyond ZANU-PF. Because keep in mind, Ibrahim Traore does not belong to any political party. He did not lead a coup in order to hand over power to any existing political party like what Chiwenga did in 2017. But in leading his coup d'etat, Ibrahim Traore had the benefit of a disjointed and fragmented military which is at war. That situation is not obtaining in Zimbabwe, and that's what makes it extremely hard for junior officers to even contemplate staging a coup. ED's tight control of the military and his unending reshuffling of position bearers, where even junior positions are not spared, is another deterrent. The lack of job security makes commanders across the board vulnerable and entirely dependent on Mnangagwa's benevolence rather than their own ability and expertise. In contrast, Ibrahim Traore's rise was facilitated by a fragmented Burkina Faso military. The ZDF is not fragmented. It's tightly controlled, and that's what makes it hard for junior commanders to stage a coup. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm simply saying it's improbable. Political analysis is not prophecy. I am not prophesying here. We are simply analyzing based on the available facts. But whatever happens, I'll be here to marinate you with all the details without fear or favor, because on this platform, we say it as it is. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share.
Feta, muone kuti vanongotaura feki.